Hey, welcome to the Strategic Success Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Fricke. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, friends. So welcome to another episode. Before I jump into the episode, I kind of wanted to try something out. So I want to kind of give you an update on some of the things I'm getting into, various things like that, kind of things that I'm facing, and just make it a little bit more, welcome you guys into my world just a little bit. And if you're listening, whether it's, on various podcast platforms or on YouTube, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you like this? Do you like hearing some of this stuff? So I'm going to ask for your feedback on this. But so at the recording of this, episode, I just got back from 2.5 weeks. So like 19 days. I spent 2 days in Canada and then the rest in France. And it was a great trip. I'm about a week and a half removed from that and playing catch up. And, thankfully while I was gone, nothing crazy happened. Some of the issues with some of my rentals, my property manager took care of. So I didn't have to be bothered while I was on the trip. Nothing like that. I was able to put my phone away the majority of the time. But I'm still catching up on emails, voicemails, text, all that, meetings, leads, all of those things. So I'm definitely thankful for the trip, but I find myself not like I really relax on the trip. So I found that I'm not like going 100 miles per hour. Like I didn't jump right back in. I feel like I'm slowly. It's like I I slowed down and I'm like starting to pick up pace, but not I didn't what's the word? Like I didn't go from being like really rested and laid back and my phone turned off 95% of the time on the trip to like, jumping all into it. So I've noticed that about myself. Still playing some catch up. Um, I'm gearing up. The end of the year is always crazy for me. So Q4 is a really great time to find deals because a lot of investors they get busy traveling the holidays, they get complacent, and so they kind of turn off buying for the year. This is usually when I say, hey, I want to ramp it up, but it's also a heavy conference time for me, so either speaking or attending. And so I will be at 3 conferences between now, so October and the end of the year. So I'm gearing up for those. Um, those are some of the things that like that's a hard time, when it comes to like speaking and, educating. I love it, but I'm never going to stop wanting to learn as a student. So like attending also matters. And 2 of my favorite classes for the year are in November and December, like 2 weeks apart. So juggling the holidays, all that. So gearing up for stuff like that, gearing up to, travel, have those trips where I travel and whatnot. I'm also, some of you guys heard I just got engaged. So now we're about to jump into a season where we're gonna have an engagement party. We're gonna be, doing wedding planning and all that. Um, so I've got a lot of that stuff I'm juggling. Um, but at the same time, I'm thankful for it, right? Like this is the stuff we prayed for, right? Like, um, and I know right now it's like a weird time in the market. So I find that there'll be some days that I play like offense, like where I'm like acquisition minded. And then there's some days where I just play defense, where I'm like, let me look at the portfolio and find out what needs my attention today. So like, for example, I've got there's some rentals that I'm stabilizing, that I'm focusing on, like, hey, like I was trying to sell 2 rentals and it was just too hard to sell them. So what are we doing? We put one that was for sale. We also put it for rent at the same time. And we said, hey, whichever one happens first. Um, Now we had to get the agent that was selling it and the property manager on the same page. I didn't want the person who was listing it to also list it for rent because it's a different skill set, and we wanted the systems and the skill set that the property manager had to lead. So we've got all that going on. But thankfully, while I was on my trip, they listed it for rent and then rented it out immediately. So this is my second rental that we've put for rent that immediately went. I have one more that's for rent, but it's with a different property manager. And so I'm like, all right, what does this look like? Same thing though, that other property was for sale. And we're like, you know what? This lower price point struggling to sell. So let's go ahead and put a tenant in it and see if we can sell it to an investor, with a good tenant in it, as a cash flowing property rather than, vacant. So I don't know if you guys can hear in the background. Maybe my audio is good enough to where you can't hear it. But I live in a neighborhood in New Orleans that there's a school, and I forget where it is, but the school's marching band, um, in practice for Mardi Gras, they march through the neighborhood. And so maybe you can hear it in the background, but they don't do it every day, but like maybe once a week or something. They will march through, and it's like literally I'm looking out the window right now, and maybe you can hear in the background, but I mean like literally the drums, all of that stuff. And they're also working on the physical part of having to march. So that is a reminder Mardi Gras is coming around the first of the year. And this is often a really dull time in my market, between the holidays and then, Mardi Gras is in usually like early February. And it's kind of like a season of, carnival season. So we've got, the holidays come up and then shortly after is carnival season, Mardi Gras. So a lot going on with all that stuff. Man, the drummers, they're really good. But that's what I have going on right now. I'm really just looking at my portfolio, saying, hey, what do I need to stabilize? And then I am looking at, you know, I'm looking for opportunities to still buy. But it's gotta be, I'm being very careful with risky marginal deals. That's where I'm seeing people get hurt right now. So, I mean, I know that's something I often talk about, but I'm definitely keeping that on the forefront of my mind right now. So mostly right now, that's what some of the things that I'm tackling through. I'm gearing up, finishing up my notes. I'm speaking at the OREA Real Estate Investor Summit, the National Real Estate Investor Summit that's in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'll be speaking twice there on November 1st, I think, or November 2nd is the day that I'm speaking. And so there's about 1,000 people who attend that event. If you're attending and you're listening to this, come check it out. My 2 sessions are the same exact session, but it's a breakout session, so it gives people time to attend, that session if they, choose another speaker during a breakout. So preparing to teach on how I do great deals with real estate agents. I love working with real estate agents. I think a lot of investors neglect them. So gearing up for that. And yeah. With that being said, you guys, I want to kind of add into the beginning of some of these podcasts a little bit of the things that I'm doing, working on, or what I have going on. And for example, I've got like those rentals that I was trying to sell, but hey, they were taking a lot longer to sell. And so, we just said, hey, we could keep dropping the price, but in this market, we had one at 160 that we're like, if we dropped it to 110, so we dropped it 50 grand, which at 160 is a significant percentage drop. We're like, we don't know. Like that's more than a quarter of the price that we're dropping it. We didn't know if we would be able to sell that at 110 just because the market is so interesting right now. And so we said, okay, hey, we didn't love the idea of keeping this property. Like it's just an older property, and we didn't want to dump a lot of cash into it to give the necessary, upgrades it needed, the renovations it needed, just because in the area that it was in. So we're like, hey, we want to sell it. We didn't want to keep it as a rental, but we decided, hey, let's go ahead and keep it. And because we had bought it subject to the loan, and so we didn't have any type of balloon, so that we could, our underlying financing is allowing us to keep it. So, we've had deals like that we're just saying, hey, you know what? We have the ability to keep them. Let's keep it, wait for the market to improve. because we can go drop it to 110. We just put a 10 in there for 1600. We could totally put a 10 in there for 1600, sell for 110, and take our spread between that and the debt we have on it. But we'd be leaving a lot of equity on the table, and sometimes that's worth it. Just slice it and move on. Um, but we said, you know what, in this market, we don't have to sell. Let's go ahead and just put a tenant in it. So we did that, and we're stabilizing. We have some seller financing stuff that we took back. So we're in the process of taking that back. And so for those of you who are actively in this business, and especially if you're both buying and you own, um, you're going to have to juggle between what it takes to get in, what it takes to um, handle your portfolio, juggling that along with buying. So that's kind of the name of the game for me right now. So um, I want to kind of pull back the curtain some with you guys by opening up these podcast episodes with just a little bit. Maybe today was a little long winded, so I want to get a little bit shorter. But those are some of the things that I'm facing right now. If you liked that little insert, let me know. I'm open to you guys' feedback. I want to give you stuff that you would like. Um, yeah. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Today's episode is kind of Halloween centric. And I want to talk with you guys about the spooky side of real estate. So, what I mean by that is, I want to talk about the spooky things that have happened to properties, because let's just face it, real life happens. And sometimes, there's real estate involved with it. Things like, so we have some stories today about ghost. We have some stories today about murders. We have stories today about uh, death and ashes, and bodies and stuff like that, and other things. Um, but that's a part of, I guess you can say it's a part of life, right? Like that is a facet of life, and just sometimes real estate is involved. And so I invited a handful of my friends. So I invited a few of my friends on, and they shared their stories. I will be sharing a few of my stories with you as well. And I also wanted to derive from them, hey, when this stuff happened, what did you do? What were the lessons you learned? And so hope you guys enjoy it. Interesting episode to say the least. These spooky stories. But you guys check them out. But to kick it off, I want to start with one of my stories. And so this was the second deal I ever bought. And it was, in the suburbs of New Orleans, which is where I got my start. So I found this deal, I believe it or not. So my very first deal was through a real estate agent. It was a short sale off the MLS. Okay. So traditionally, sourced it, I guess you could say. This was my first direct to seller one. I reached out to, it was a Craigslist ad, and it was for two properties. It was a mobile home and a house. And the way that the property was situated was like literally a 1970s mobile home was the original structure, and they built a carport over it, like a pretty nice one, like roofed, all that stuff. And then eventually, when the mobile home got too much damage and deterioration from lack of repairs, or whatever, ultimately they built a one bedroom, one bath, like 600 square foot, I forgot, maybe no more than 800 square foot house next to it. And and it was all on one parcel. So the woman was selling it. I bought it for $20,000 off of a Craigslist ad. Okay. And I know a lot, we could dive into that. But so I went and I bought this property from a lady, Miss Roxanne. And so I remember, this is my second deal I ever bought. I bought it as a initially as a rental. Learned that they were going to expand the highway, uh, where basically this was a like a side street to the highway. So I was like, man, that's gonna impact the deal. So then I was like, you know what? Plus, I realized I had all my money tied up in this. And so, lesson learned, I was like, you know what? Instead of a rental, I'm going to turn it into a flip. Okay. That was halfway through the project. So, one of the things we did was I was like, look, I'm not going to renovate the trailer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to demo the trailer, and in demoing the trailer, I am going to like demo it in place because I wanted to keep that carport. Because what I was going to do was afterwards I was going to put gravel in there and make it a more like where someone could put an RV, a boat, it was nice. I wanted to preserve it, but you can't pull the mobile home out of it. It was just, we couldn't do that. So my family has machinery. So my dad came in with a bobcat and a skidster, and we basically, I went in there, I demoed the mobile home, and then when it came down to the final supports, we basically busted those out, collapsed the walls, and then rolled up all the like tin and like into like a burrito. And so then what we had left was the metal frame. And so then I had another family member, my sweet papa. This was probably this is one of the only times he's ever come to a project. And I cherish this memory. My grandfather, who's my only living grandparent, he comes to the property and he loves like scrap metal and, stuff like that. And so I said, "Look, Papa, you can have the furnace, you can have the cast iron tub, and then if you want, you can come and get the frame." And he said, "Oh, I can bring my torch and I can cut the frame." And I was like, "All right." And so my grandpa shows up and he's cutting it, and and so he would cut it, and then I'd load it up into the back of his flatbed truck in his trailer. And so this is that metal frame that is going. Well, mobile homes are generally on metal, they have the metal frames, right? And then a lot of times they have these footers that they're on, like, so what he was doing is as he was cutting the frame, and let's just say, half of the frame was done, and I was taking the metal frame and putting it on his trailer. Then I was also taking the cement blocks that the trailer was placed on, and I was moving those as well. And as well as I had some other help. And so as we're doing that, I realized one of the cement blocks looked different. And I'm like, so I like, whistle, I'm like, hey, 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 everyone, stop what you're doing. Let me check this out. And I look, and it's a freaking headstone, like cemetery level headstone. And so I was like, everyone go take a break. I'm sitting there, and because I was involved with this transaction, direct to seller, I recognized the name on the headstone as the seller's ex-husband. And so I'm sitting here and I'm just like, I hope that this guy is not like buried here, right? Because like at that point, if you find a body or at gravesite, you've got to stop your project. There's got to be a whole investigation. They've got to do something with the body, like. And I didn't know this was my second ever deal, and I'm like, I don't know what it all looks like, but I just knew that it meant that it was going to be a big deal. So I immediately, I was like, hey, let's take a break. I need to figure out what's going on here. Y'all don't touch that. And I call the seller, and I was like, she picks up, hey, Courtney, how's it going? All that. I said, Miss Roxanne, I have a very important question. Is your ex-husband buried underneath the mobile home? And she goes, what? The things I find in real, like, only me, right? Not me, but not only me, but seriously, I'm like, of course I would. And she's like, wait, what did you say? She's like, starts laughing. She's like, no, seriously, what do you mean? And I explained what we had just done and found, and she just starts laughing. And she can hear not the panic, but like she can tell I was worried, right? And she goes, oh, honey, my ex-husband was in the military, which the headstone reflected it. Like it said, like you can, like it had his military credentials on it. And she goes, honey, the VA when he passed away, the VA, we ordered for him to be cremated, but they got the paperwork wrong and they accidentally sent both his, his remains in the urn as well as a headstone. And so when we called them, they said, just keep it. So they threw it underneath the mobile home. And she was like, and I called her son, checked it out, all that stuff. And they're like, yeah, that's what happened. And there's a level there that I was okay. Well, then, I feel wrong. What do you want me to do with this? And she goes, well, I'll make sure my son gets it. He can have it. She was like, and this woman's like in her late 70s. She was like, just put it at the end of the curb because the property was fenced. She was like, put it, outside the fence, and I'll pick it up. I'm in town in a few days, because she lived maybe an hour or two away. She said, I'll be back in town in a few days and I'll pick it up. And I was like, man, you're in your 60s or 70s, you need help. She's like, well, uh, you know, I'll make sure I arrange help to come with me because it was heavy, right? It was a tombstone, a headstone. And so that was right around the time we normally do not get snow here, but we had gotten some snow, so she got delayed in coming. And that was back when I had one time when I had my Tacoma, one of my Tacomas. And so I had building supplies all in the back of my truck from the project. And it was I eventually got to the point where I was like, I called her, I said, hey, let me come meet you and I will load this into your vehicle. So we were arranging that. So in the back of my truck, I remember going to Walmart one time and I was like, I go to the store not thinking, I come back, and then I looked at my back of my truck and I just busted out laughing, thinking, if someone saw the back of my truck right now, I can only imagine what they think about me because I had this headstone, but I also had like shovels and stuff like that. So I'm like, do they think I just robbed a grave? Like that's what it looked like. And so eventually I met up with her and I gave her the headstone back, loaded it in the back of her car. That crap was heavy. But that's my story of finding a headstone on on one of my projects. Um, Wild story. If I can, I'm going to include a picture right here so you guys can see it. But yeah, it was a wild story. And so you never know what you're going to find. I definitely learned, you know, to always, my dad always taught me to look, and be very observant. And you guys know me, like, it's crazy. I have found a tremendous amount of money and stuff on the ground because my eyes are always looking. It's just something my dad always taught me growing up, was to just be very observant. And that was a situation where, that lesson, you know, it came true, where I was being observant. And then you've got to learn to know when to, call a break, investigate further, double check. I wanted to make sure she wasn't, fibbing. And then if that, because it would have been a very different story if he would have been there. So thankful that he wasn't. Good Lord. But so that's my first story I want to tell you. I'm going to bring on my next guest here in a second, but I want you to stay tuned for the rest of the show because I've got a few of my friends I invited on to tell their stories. But at the end, I'm going to tell you my big spooky real estate story. So definitely stay tuned. There's more fun coming along the way. But man, that was my second deal ever. And, you know, man, you never know what you're going to find, truly. Hey guys, Courtney Fricke here. We've got Aussie Steve. And look, if you have a deal that needs to get moved, Southeast Louisiana, even in South Mississippi, we're your folks. We are the largest dispo company, really in the greater New Orleans area, even Southeast Louisiana. We have great contacts in South Mississippi as well. Steve, why do we move more deals than others?
Just we're very deep in this market. So Greater New Orleans can be really confusing for national wholesalers. The comps are hard. We change block for block. We got flood zones. We get a lot of hurricanes and the likes. And just a lot of the national platforms don't have the buyers on their list. So we are deep with buyers, but we're deep with relationships, which is really important in this market. So we love JVing with out-of-state investors.
Like I said, we do a ton of business with other investors. So go to homebuyerlouisiana.com/Courtney, fill out the information. We'll get in touch with you and we'll move this deal along. All right, friends. So for our spooky episode, I've got my good friend Maria Giordano with us, and she's going to be sharing with us one of her stories about something spooky that happened with real estate. So Maria, give everyone a quick overview of your background in real estate.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a real active real estate investor. Been doing it full time now for probably close to 20 years or right around 20 years or so. Um, I got started with fix and flip and Airbnb before it was a thing. They moved over thanks to our buddy Pete Fortunato to buy and hold, and I buy stuff creatively. So to did minor land division, spec builds, small subdivision builds. So quite a few different things. But I'm mostly now either rehabbing or, a housing provider, making my portfolio work.
Love it. So you've got a story for us today. Now, my understanding is this wasn't an investment, but it was something else, but still real estate related. Tell us about it. I want to hear it.
Yeah. So when my husband and I had tried for years to have a child or whatever, and of course, when you don't try after 6 years, that's when you get pregnant. And so it was as my oldest was graduating from college or whatever, and instead of downsizing, we decided we needed to upsize, and that's kind of how this whole thing began. I found this great property. I'm also into horses or whatever, and it was a horse property, really cute, whatever, found it on the internet, get my realtor because I know it was actually a traditional one, whatever. But and as I'm driving up, and it was a gorgeous property, but I think sometimes women are just you get that gut feeling or something weird.
Pretty
And
intuitive, huh?
as I'm pulling up and I see my realtor, the first thing I ask my realtor is, did anyone die here? Or did someone die here?
What gave
And
you
don't
that feeling? Like just you were like something's off.
it was just like something was off. And the house wasn't spooky. It's a beautiful house. I mean, it's like $1 million property, gorgeous trees, end of a cul-de-sac, cute neighborhood. It was like that. But when you think about it, that's kind of how horror movies start too. So, he just looks at me and he's like, well, that's odd, Maria. After all these properties that you've done that look like the murder house or whatever, really, this is gorgeous. So we go in, we look around, and again, it's light, it's airy, whatever. Make an offer. We move in I think it's either the day before or 2 days before my C-section for my son, Marco. And I, and that's kind of when the thing started, when I was actually in the hospital with my having my baby. My one son ended up having scorpions in his bed. No big deal. It happens in the Southwest. Never happened to us before.
So
But
this
at
was
first,
Arizona when you
this
lived
was
in.
Arizona, and you do not apparently have to disclose if there are ghosts. And like California, I guess you do. And you can actually have signs that say ghost-free house. But anyhow, so all of a sudden, like, scorpions were dropping down on my one daughter. They just loved her. They'd crawl up her pants, whatever. And I just kept getting weird feelings in this house. And my kids were too, but we're all thinking we're ridiculous and no one's communicating with the other person.
Right.
Well, it would be at night, and all of a sudden I would see like something out of the periphery of my, eyes are open. I'm cooking in the kitchen, making something, whatever, a bottle, you name it. And it was like a shadow person. It was really weird. I still get the goosebumps, would go by. And then, for instance, one night, my son Alexander, when we started comparing stories, was like sitting on the sofa, and he said he saw this guy come walking down the hall and just like appeared right in front of him as he was walking TV, and turned around. And Alex was like, dude, and my son Alex was, 6'4", big, became a Marine, everything. And then my other daughter,
Wait,
Aria,
hold on. So wait, your son was like, there was a guy in the house, and he wasn't like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Or was it like it happened and then
it happened, and he's thinking, okay, he's sitting on the sofa watching probably a horror movie at the time, and he's thinking that he's hallucinating, like, I'm tired, it's 2 a.m. kind of thing, like, this isn't real.
Okay.
And then my oldest daughter, who had gone off to college, would come home, and one night she's home alone with the dogs, and suddenly she's hearing footsteps going down the hallway. And
Okay.
she's like, Mom, and nobody's there. And then she'd hear a door close. And she's like, this is weird.
Okay.
My other daughter would feel like something was watching her. She's getting out of the shower or in her bedroom, especially. Well, what finally did it for me was one night I was in bed. Gary was working at the hospital, night shifts or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm laying in bed and it was like the most gruesome, horrifying thing ever, like came right up to my face like this. And it's almost like so you just can't move and you can't scream and you're just frozen.
What do you think it was?
Well, then I went back to my realtor after that. I said, "Are you sure?" And I started doing some digging, and I found out that my bedroom, the previous owner, was found dead.
Okay.
And
Like dead by natural causes, dead by disease, dead
no, by
by
like overdose,
suicide.
possibly, or just too many medications. Because the story goes is that he was down in Rocky Point doing the sand dunes, whatever, flipped over, got in a bad accident, got addicted to painkillers. At the
Okay.
same time, the market crashed. This was back around 2010, 11, kind of ish. And he lost his electrical contracting company. His
Okay.
wife also had like a salon or something, losing her.
Yeah.
And he just kind of got hooked on painkillers and other things.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
his life was kind of going to crap, but this house was like everything to him. And
So you find this out from the realtor and from your own investigating.
yeah, my neighbors and stuff.
Yeah. So these weird things are happening to you, your kids, maybe even Gary too, your husband. What?
Yeah. And it was like you would have the dogs sit there and their hair would stand up and they're staring at something.
Ugh.
And that was the creepy part because they are like fixed on something you can't see.
So what did you do? Like you buy this nice house with the horses and you move like the whole thing, right? You go through all that effort and then you're experiencing these things. Um so what did you do? How long did you end up staying there? Like what happened next?
So, like, amazing person, my realtor offers. So I know this person who can come and she's kind of like a clairvoyant or whatever. I'm like, okay, sure. So she comes to the house and she gets the vibe and she says, oh, it's harmless. He just loves this house and everything. And I'm like, harmless my ass. This dude is like terrifying me. My son, I felt like he was trying to possess or something because Marco, too, as an infant, would sit there and stare at something. And you would see, so I had the baby cameras in this, and you would see orbs. It
Oh
was
wow.
really weird. So then I was at another conference and I met this person. It was the second time I met her. And I knew that she did stuff with ghosts and whatnot. And the rational side of me is telling Maria, this isn't happening. You're people are gonna think
Yeah.
you're totally, because you can't just tell your friends and stuff. They're really thinking that you're doing
Like,
drugs
yeah,
or
I got a
drinking.
ghost in my house.
Yeah. So I went up to this woman. I said, "You're gonna think I'm totally crazy with what I'm about to tell you." And I proceeded to tell her about the ghost and his family situation, and the house was like everything to him, and it was kind of over the top
Right.
as far as the stuff he did to it. And she's like, "No, that's not bizarre at all." She's like, "I think you need an exorcism."
So like hire a priest exorcism?
No, like I hired her, and this is
Oh,
where it gets so ridiculous. I can't believe I'm developing. I've never really told anybody about this. So Courtney, you're first.
well, thank you.
So she did a long distance exorcism, if that makes sense.
Okay.
She's out in California. I know people are like, all these California, and actually, she's from your neck of the woods. She's from New Orleans.
Okay, this is making more and more sense.
More and
Okay.
more sense, right?
Yeah.
But she was also doing stuff like that for these vastly rich and famous people and politicians and stuff.
Okay.
So she came with a pretty hefty price tag. And she's like, okay, Maria, I'm not going to tell you when I'm doing this, but I paid her the money or whatever. I'm going to do this for you. And we're going to do a clearing and you're going to just feel amazing. And your house is going to be completely a different place. And it's going to be like the home you've always wanted. The chaos is going to die down. You're going to stop seeing the shadow people, and your dogs are going to love it. Because I mean, even like one of my dogs got like stabbed out in
Oh,
that backyard. We have no idea how. And he came in with like this gaping hole in the road, and there's nothing out there to hurt him. It was just like all sorts of really bad things were going on.
okay.
I mean,
So
even
when
one of
she
my
did,
horses had their face smashed. It was bad.
so
Anyhow,
there's injuries, there's a lot of
yeah.
like things terrifying you guys, and so I don't blame you for being like, I know this sounds a little woo woo, but okay, I'll pay the money. So did it work?
So I didn't know when she was doing it. And then one night I woke up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was like the inside of my house glowed. It was like someone took the moon and put it in the middle of my house, and the whole house glowed. And
Huh.
at that moment, I was like, it's gone. And the whole ominous presence and heaviness was completely lifted.
Huh.
It was like this total loving, glowing, and it was like that all the way until I moved.
Wow. And so whatever she did, and she didn't tell you when she was gonna do it, but
No.
it worked. And so then you guys were able to move forward peacefully. And
Mhm.
okay.
And everything stopped. Like the chaos and the fighting between my husband and I stopped. Like it's like there was so much tension. And it was like it was trying to push him away. And what this
Wow.
person has told me is like, no, he wants you and your family, but he doesn't want your husband there.
Huh.
And that was exactly like what he was trying to do. And it was like he was almost trying to possess though my infant
Oh
child.
wow.
So that's how crazy all of this was.
So man, that's crazy. It's crazy the results you saw on the back end. I'm sure your life felt like hell during that time.
Oh,
For everyone in the house. And man, that's wild. And so you were living with a ghost, um, and your family, all of you guys were experiencing it. Um,
and it wasn't until we all came together, because it was about going on for a good 6 to 8 months before
yeah.
any of us said anything to the other person, because we're all thinking, this is crazy.
So
This,
like you guys all questioned yourselves, like, oh, that didn't really happen, or that's not what that was, like type of thing, right?
mm-hmm.
Crazy. So what's a lesson here quickly would you say that you learned from this real estate experience, with this ghost encounter or whatever it was?
Well, number one, always go with your intuition or your instincts, because
Right.
chances are what you're feeling is real.
Mhm.
Can't believe I'm saying, but I do believe that ghosts and all that are real. I do think many times
Sure.
that they're really just trapped and need to move on.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
spiritual side to it for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do need to hire that professional to go in and do that.
Yeah.
Um, but any house I have now, I thank the house. I tell them I'm here to make you pretty again, or put a nice family in there. I
Yeah.
approach real estate, I think, a lot different than I used to.
Realizing that there's baggage that comes with the houses that we buy, right?
Mhm.
And there's always a story. And how old was this house?
This house was originally built in the late 70s, and
Yeah.
then the guy had bought it late 70s, early 80s, and then he had bought it and added on all this square footage, and just you'd never recognize what the
So
real
he's
estate
been there,
person.
he had been there for a long time, and then
Yeah, for probably a good 10 years or so.
um so and then how long had it been since he had passed since when you got it?
Um, so it turns out that the people that were selling it to me had bought it out of probate, and
From
were
his family.
bringing it up to date, remodeling, doing all this other stuff. And
Okay.
they obviously knew that the guy had died there. They just never disclosed it.
They didn't disclose it because in the state you bought it in Arizona, you don't have to. Okay.
Exactly.
I think we have just a little bit more time because I heard you had one more little story. Where is this story based out of? And then tell me that.
So I initially was born and raised on the east side of Milwaukee, not far from UW Milwaukee, about
You
three
can always
blocks.
tell in your accent. Yeah.
Yeah, my accent.
Yeah.
Midwest through and through. So when I was about 8 years old, my parents bought a property about 2.5, 3 blocks from the triplex that we lived in, that they
So
owned.
was this an investment or a primary that they bought?
They bought it as a primary. We were moving from a primary that we lived in, but they had tenants above
So a
to,
triplex, they were house hacking, and
yeah,
then this is a single family primary that they
yep,
were
a
gonna
single family,
move into.
old house on the east side of Milwaukee, built in the mid 1800s ish.
Okay, okay,
And it had been one of the first properties there, old farmhouse, all this kind of, the garage was like a carriage house kind of thing.
oh wow,
And it had the old cellars, that you
okay.
see in the basement, that are also creepy and everything
Those
else.
are folklore to me. I live in Louisiana. We don't have basements and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna believe you when you say cellar, basement, things like that. Um,
Sure, we don't really have them much in Arizona, but yeah. So in the Midwest, you'd have that cell, and the other purpose of the cell, it was dual purpose. We had tornadoes, so you could crawl down there to
cellar, okay.
get
Was
get
it
away from the
finished, unfinished, as far as the cellar?
it was mostly unfinished. It
Okay,
was a big house. And my brother and I, it was like whatever he could do, I could do better. And I was the biggest tomboy. And so we played a lot in the basement and stuff. And he would love to lock me in places. Um, and so kind of around the corner from the cellar, there was it almost had like 2 cellars. The
okay,
other one always was locked or whatever. It was like a root cellar, I guess. Whereas
okay.
one they used for canning. Well, one day we got into the root cellar and we were moving stuff around, my brother and I, and there was and it was this room that really creepy. And if you think of it, all encased in stone,
Okay.
and it had a pentagram on the middle of the floor.
Was it like so like a pentagram, but was like did y'all have flooring and you removed the flooring and you found that? Was it like dirty when you swept it up you found it? Or
Yeah,
was it
it was like dirty. And one of the cellars was a dirt floor, the other one wasn't, but it was really dirty. So I think my parents maybe just assumed that it was like a dirt floor or whatever.
yeah,
And in horsing around or whatever my brother and I were doing, we kicked up this dust, we saw this red stuff or whatever. And so we're like, oh, what's this? So we're moving it all and, cleaning up or whatever, being totally filthy. And sure enough, it was this circle with this star in the middle of it, and burn marks and other stuff. But it was interesting too, because at the time I would have the most horrible, like graphic kind of nightmares. I never had it before.
right.
And it was always around, I discovered this, it was always around almost like a satanic kind of ritual. Not that I knew what that was back then.
Right.
So
So you're having these crazy nightmares, very graphic, and then going down there playing, and you find this, you're roughing around, you find this, pentagram. What did your parents do?
nothing. It
Nothing.
was
They
like
just left it in the house.
stuff in the house. I think maybe they had painted over it or something, but it was like, we don't talk about that. And my father is not a superstitious anything. Like I said, I could never tell my dad about ghosts. He'd be like, oh my God, you're
Sure.
whatever, Maria.
Right.
So yeah, I think I kind of remember, I think they did like white paint or whatever over it.
Sure.
But yeah, there was no conversation. It was like, it never happened.
And I grew up in a very religious household, and my experience through life, I'm here in New Orleans. My experience of life is people either completely negate it and say, "Oh, that doesn't have any, like that's not real. That like I'm not giving it any place," or they're like, "Hey, I respect it." And then some people, they they like overemphasize it, right? So like you've got these spectrums, and so it sounds like your dad was just like, it has no power. It's nothing. I'm just going to paint over it because I don't want that in my house.
And it's
Some people
crazy because our house would get struck by lightning and
like things were
other
happening to it.
crazy stuff.
Wow.
And like I said, once we moved out of it, we moved out to the suburbs or whatever, when I was about 10 or so. So we were only in there for a couple of years. All the nightmares, everything stopped.
So did your parents keep it as a rental?
No, they sold it. They
Okay.
sold it. It was back in the 80s when the markets collapsed and everything.
Okay. Okay. Wow. You know, it just goes to remind us, and I have not bought a ton of older houses in my life, although New Orleans has a ton of them. I've kind of steered away from them. I just don't love the level of rehab most of them need. Um, that's just not my favorite thing about real
It's my
estate.
bread and butter where I live
I
now.
look, I know that's your thing, right? Um, but there's a level there that an older house to me just is like more occupants, more history, more potential for, you know, stuff like this. And so you never know what might be underneath that dirty floor in y'all's, you know, cellar, basement, whatever. That's
No,
crazy.
no, whenever I buy a house, I always tell it, hey, I'm here to make you pretty again.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Maria, thanks so much for sharing your stories with us. And man, so ghost and pentagrams. Um, you know, there's always something. You know, this is why I
There is.
love real estate. It keeps us on our toes.
Yes, it does. It keeps it exciting.
Well, appreciate you sharing with us.
Thanks.
All right, so here's our next spooky story. So, you may have seen this guy before. He's been on multiple episodes here. He's no stranger to the Strategic Success podcast. This is one of my close friends and business partners, Aussie Steve. So, Steve Keegery. Steve, give people a quick overview about, you know, what do you do in real estate and where are you based out of?
Yeah, you know, I have run an acquisition company. We're acquiring distressed properties. We wholesale the majority of them. I do keep rentals, but just basically always, you know, acquiring distressed properties and looking for deals.
Love it. And you're based mostly out of the greater New Orleans. You're based in New Orleans, but you work in like pretty much South
Yeah.
Louisiana, Southeast Louisiana. And so you've got a fun story. Let's jump right into it. Where is this story? Like talk about like where what happened and you know, all of that stuff.
So this is a deal that we did wholesale. It was in Avondale, so on the West Bank of Jefferson Parish. It had a complicated title to it. There was three successions. There was an aunt. There was a fair bit of legal stuff and like ownership that had been moved over time. So you know, that's scary of itself, but that's not the scary part. We worked through all that.
Yeah.
Ended up getting cleared to close. I did assign the deal, so it was a wholesale deal. So I signed it to one of our friends and investors, Dominique Gunderson, who I think's been
Yeah.
on your podcast. So I signed
Yep.
the deal to her. We closed. Everything was good. Dominique was happy with the deal. I was happy to get a wholesale fee. My sellers were happy to get paid. So that was all good. But probably about 2 weeks later, Dominique gave me a phone call and she said, Steve, I've got a problem. And I'm like, okay, you know, what's the
Of course.
story? And she said, there's a dead person in the property. And I'm like, okay, wait, what? And what it turned out was she found ashes, an urn.
Okay.
We've what obviously was ashes of a human in the property. So
Thankfully it wasn't the actual body,
this
but
was an actual body, you know.
different path for that, you know.
So it was obviously a bit freaky for her to find this.
Sure.
She obviously didn't really know who that was or what to do with it. So she was obviously concerned about like they obviously the seller forgot something seemingly
Sure.
pretty important. So we got in contact with the seller, and the seller basically was like, I don't know who that is. And I didn't like because there was like three successions, and whoever was last in the property had been there a while, been vacant a while, but they didn't really know them or connected to them. So he's like, I don't know who that is. I don't really care. It's your dead body.
So it had been in the family for a long time. And if I remember the story right a little bit, didn't they also rent it out or maybe they let
Yeah.
families stay there? So they either rented it, let families stay there. So like they weren't the last occupants. And so
And it had
in
been
essence,
vacant. It had been vacant for a while too. So there was quite a distance between. And one
yeah.
of the people were missing. There was an executor. It was quite a complicated title. I forget the exact details. But basically, the people we were dealing with who sold and had the interest, the heirs, like they were very disconnected with the property and who had been in it. So they didn't really know who it was either, and they didn't really care. So he left the problem, you know, really with Dominique. But like, I mean, I cared because like I wanted to help Dominique. But I'm like, man, what do I do? So I figured out that it didn't have a name, but there was a crematorian on the urn. So we did call the crematorian and they were on the North Shore. and you know,
Yeah.
they said, hey, you know, if you bring it to us, we can try to figure out who it belongs to. We can't tell you or share information. We can figure it out, or you know,
Yeah.
if we can't find them, we can like put them somewhere respectful. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, like it's the North Shore. I'm like, who could?
It
I'm like,
could
who
be like
can
a good hour from your house, like an hour drive from
Good hour
you.
from my house, which I would drive, but I'm like, I just knew I had a friend who loves helping people, who
Yeah.
loves solving problems, who likes crazy stories, and who lived at that point lived on the North Shore, which
Mhm.
obviously was you. So so
Yeah.
so I called you up. I
Yeah.
told you I had a dead body. Look, credit guys, she ended up at the house in half an hour. She had a hacksaw. She had cleaning detergent. I'm like, no, no. Of course not. But yeah, obviously I explained it to you, and I guess maybe you can I guess you can I guess bringing you into
I'll
the
take
story.
it from there. Yeah, I'll take it from there. When you were like, "Hey, we've got these ashes. They need to get to this crematorium," which is like a pretty hike into the North Shore, in North Covington, and I was like, "All right. Well, the next time I'm in the city, and it'll be in like a day or two, I'll pick it up." So I picked it up, and I remember you and I met somewhere. I want to say it might have even been on the West Bank or somewhere, and we had a walkthrough we were going on together. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe in Marrero, but we go on that, and then um you open up your console and you take this little box, and it's basically the baseline urn. It's like a plastic box, nondescript, and the ashes are in like basically like a ziploc inside of that, right? Like basically that's not the fancy urn type of thing, right? And you had it in your console, and I'm like, well, hell, okay. So I take it, I put it in my front seat, and I put the seatbelt around it. And so I'm like, all right, when I go back home, the next day was when I can go to that crematorium and drop it off. And I literally I remember driving and being like, I hope I don't get in a wreck. And if I got like in my head, my fear was I got in a wreck and then I have like ashes in my mouth. Like I was like, so then I'm like, and we didn't know who it was, right? The only thing we knew was like there was like a number on the bottom and like
Yeah,
the seal
that's
for the
it.
crematorium. And so they're like, we'll do the research, but like to try to find the next of kin to like properly pass it off to them or do whatever with it. All right. And so I'm like, I don't know who this is. I don't know if this is a good person, an axe murderer, like I have no idea. And so I'm like, respectfully, you're not coming in my house like at night. So I like left them in my car. I'm like, I'm sorry. I wish you the best. But, and because I had appointments. So after I left that one, I had appointments. I think I had a closing on the North Shore. And so I'm sitting in the title company and I'm doing this closing, and I do so much business with this title company. I remember telling them, I was like, you'll never guess what's on my front seat. And they're like, oh God, knowing you. And I sometimes love doing deals just for the story. And obviously I wasn't a part of the real estate deal on this one, but so a lot of my real estate deals have crazy stories with them too. And so they're like, oh God, we have no idea. And then finally I was like, it's a box of ashes. And they're like, no way. I was like, seriously. They like walked out, the staff walked out with me to my car, looked at it. They're like, only you, Courtney, only you. And so I went home that night again, left in the front seat, and then the next morning I went to the crematorium, and then I, brought the ashes to them. So, producer, editor, please go ahead and put a photo right here. I'll show you guys proof of the little box on the front seat. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, for those listening on where you listen to podcasts, if you got a chance, go take a look and on YouTube, and you'll be able to to see a photo of this. So we bring this to the crematorium, and they're like, "Thank you so much for being respectful and getting this to us, and all this, right?" And then something else happened, Steve. You call me again. What else happened in this one?
Yeah, so I called you after I got another call from Dominique, maybe a week later, a week and a half later,
Yeah,
and she calls me again. She's like, Steve, got another body. So she found in a different place. It was quite behind, so she started doing some
like
more
in the attic or something,
rehab. Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
or maybe it was like in the like hidden in the closet or something.
Yeah, she started working through rehab. She found another set of ashes. She actually found the proper box. We actually had a name. This actually had the name on it, and it had the name
Yeah,
of, yeah. So it must have been the casing for the other person that we had found. So we had another body. So again, I'm like, I know who I'm calling. I have a fixer to get rid of bodies. Her name's Courtney Fricke.
Oh god, that could go so wrong. But I mean, so at this point we actually knew who this one was, and so we brought it to the same I brought that one to the same crematorium, including the box that the other one had been separated from. And so a little bit of mystery solved there. But in the back, and I've got to pull the photos because this was like what, 2 years ago now or something like that, a year or two ago, something like that. I'll pull the photos up because I remember the name being a little unique, and but I strapped them into the back seat, and I at least could call them by their name, but I said also respectfully, you're not coming in my house. So but we were able to deliver both of them. And I never followed up to see if they got to the family, or find the next of kin. I mean, it could have been a tenant, it could have been um people leave all sorts of what you would deem as valuable stuff in houses all the time. I mean, my second ever house, I found literally all their will paperwork and everything left. And really with that house, I mean, the guy only took his pillow and he left everything else in the house. So like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. It did not look like anything got touched. And so when I found valuable stuff, that was, you know, that was a lesson for me that people don't always take valuable things, even though it's mind blowing that they wouldn't think to pack up, mom or dad or grandma, or grandpa, whoever, and bring them with them.
Well, I did follow up with Dominique, and apparently it was a killer of a deal. So,
So that, okay. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
I'll
Not
give you actually, funnily enough, I'll give you a little bonus story because this
okay.
morning, I was doing a walk through the property where we're closing on in Metairie, another wholesale deal, and the lady, there was a bit of an issue with the title. Her first husband he'd seen a lawyer and had given her the property, but he actually didn't do all the proper paperwork, so it actually wasn't legally transferred over, and it mean that, and he'd passed away, so his heirs had paper. So the whole drama with the ex-husband. So we're talking about the husband, and the family didn't do the right thing, and she's like, yeah, because I'm a nice person. She goes, oh, that's my second husband here, he's like he was in the house actually, and he's like he didn't have a place to live, so he came, and like I've let him stay in my house because I'm a nice person. And she goes, and that's my third husband there, and on top of the fridge. And I turned around, and there's like it's like not even anything. It was like in like this bag, and like it was a little bar fridge was right behind me. And there's my third husband there, and I'm just like, okay, so
I was the fourth husband. I'm
so
like,
so there was another ashes like in this place. I'm like, okay, all right.
our
I think
timeline.
she's gonna take him. I hope she could. We haven't closed on that one yet. That was the last walkthrough. So I hope the husband's gone when we close on that one.
Um, Remind her to take, regardless if she likes them, to please take him.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that stuff's wild, but like if you think about it, um, people have that all the time. Like they get um I mean, it's crazy, but like not everyone has a lot of support system in family. And so maybe you're some of their only support system, but even if you're not close, you still, like if they get cremated or whatever, you might be left with that even though you're not so close with them,
Yeah.
which is crazy and sad and all those things. Um but yeah, I just was like, thankfully I did not get in a car wreck because I was just like, I just don't want like to have it in my, I'm just thinking the only accident I would
Oh,
ever get in is the one where we're rolling over and the entire time I just have ashes in my mouth, and I'm just like, that
you're making me feel
was
that, Courtney. You saying that is making I can feel the
that was my, as I'm driving, I'm like, I am going to be the safest driver. I'm like, and I like strapped it down, and I was like, because I do not want this flying around in my car. Because I can be a little bit of an aggressive driver. And so I was just like, that was worst case scenario in my head. Uh, but yeah, so if you guys ever find something like that, and look for some descriptive tags on it, and look for the maybe information on the crematorium, and see if
We'll
they'll
just
take
call
it.
Courtney.
Or call me. No, call the seller. That was a great first step. I'm like, hey, we found, maybe a family member. Um, that's wild. But when you do real estate, especially when you do deal after deal, you're gonna find some stuff like this over time. and obviously, Steve, it's like they're attracted to you because you have found a few now, and then now you found the other one this morning that hopefully she takes.
Hopefully.
We'll see. We'll see. Well, Steve, any lessons learned from this one other than I am not your fixer for dead bodies? What other lessons did you learn from this?
Uh I think the lessons I think the lessons for the buyer, you're gonna find some weird things in houses, so you're gonna find these sorts of things, strange things you need to deal with. I guess using a good wholesale, like I care, so like I'm gonna, because like I wasn't really involved because I'd assigned it, so it wasn't my deal. But like I guess working with a good wholesaler, I care, I'm gonna help you,
Like it
so
wasn't technically your problem anymore,
yeah,
but you
yeah.
were willing to stay involved in the deal after the deal.
Well, because I was the in between between the seller and the
Right.
buyer. So like firstly, like the seller might have wanted the ashes, so I was first concerned about the seller because I'm like, hey, like that seems important, so I'm gonna
Right.
like try to look after my seller. And then when they didn't want it, now I'm like, well, my buyer is also really important, so like I'm gonna help them with this funny situation, or I'll just just call Courtney and get her to help them.
So I think those are some great lessons. You want to make sure that especially if your buyer is working with wholesalers, some of them, the minute they get the money, they don't care, they don't feel responsibility, they don't, and that's usually short-sighted people, right? Long-term thinkers like Steve are like, hey, I want to make sure, even, we might have done a deal 6 months ago, and if something comes up, Steve would be like, hey, I'll see what I can do to help, right? Regardless if it's his responsibility or not, he's going to work to keep the relationships, and both with the seller and with the end buyer. And it's also speaks to relationships in general. It was our network that solved that problem. Steve, you got that phone call, you're like, hey, I've got this issue now. And especially after the sellers were like, hey, not we don't want it. It was through your network you were able to find a solution. And so and I think too many people, they either act like an island, right? Like they don't care to build relationships, and that'll impact them. Or they act short-sighted and they lose, quality relationships because they act, short-sighted.
For sure.
So, well, Steve, thanks for coming on again and sharing another story. Please don't give me any more ashes to deliver. I am still freaked out enough by having to drive with a thing of ashes of someone I did not know twice already. No more, okay? Thank
All
you.
right, deal, deal.
Appreciate you
Oh,
hanging out
thanks
and
for
sharing
having
with
me
me
on.
again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
man. All right, folks. Now let's jump into our next spooky real estate story. So I got my friend with me, Rich Rice, out of California. Rich, go ahead and give us a little overview of what you do in real estate, where you're based out of.
Yeah, absolutely, Courtney. Thanks for having me on. So I've been doing real estate now for about 8 years. I started off just flipping and wholesaling for the most part, as many of us do. And eventually I realized that, I started looking at all those houses that I sold and decided I wanted to start keeping them. And other than a flip here and there, I've been trying to pretty much hold on to everything at this point. So pretty much a reformed flipper, now buy and hold.
Well, cool. I can definitely I can relate to that. The majority of what I do is buy and hold stuff. Be I previously like to say I'm a you say reformed, but I like to say I'm a recovering, because every night I relapse and I'll wholesale
Yeah.
or flip it or whatever. But so you've got a spooky story for us, and
Mhm.
so tell me a little bit about it. Tell us about this story. Where is it based out of, and then and jump on into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, like I said, I've been flipping for a while, and we kind of found this niche up in or down in Southern California, up in the mountains in this little town of Crestline. It's up near Lake Arrowhead and Big
I've
Bear.
been there,
Yeah,
so
awesome,
same story.
awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's this little town Crestline. It's like the first stop on your way up the mountain, and it's
Mhm.
also one of the it's kind of overshadowed by Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear and all that. But it's actually, I think, one of the oldest towns. Movie stars been going up there since the 20s. Lucille Ball and like the early 20s movie stars used to go up there and retreat all the time. It was a very like desirable kind of Hollywood escape kind of before it became like Arrowhead. Took that kind of or that montage, I guess. So Crestline has been around for a while. There's a lot of old cabins built
Okay.
in the 20s, the 1900s. Um, I own a couple still. So some of, I mean, it's, the foundations are sitting on rocks and or tree
Yeah.
stumps and, and this house in particular, we were actually we had bought one of the houses in the area on the same street, and we were working on it, noticed that it was pretty bad shape. And we actually we sent you sent a couple letters to the owners,
Mhm.
and eventually they got a hold of us. And it just always, it was weird. It was like there was just something always like kind of creepy about the house. Like it just, a lot of these houses when they're especially in the mountains, they kind of have that creepiness factor to them. But this one was just like extra creepy. We didn't really know why. But it was just when our guys were working on one of the houses across the street, um, one of them swears that there was they saw somebody in the window kind of thing.
Sure.
And it was in, like I said, it was in pretty rough shape. The staircase going into them was, all falling apart. And our guys working nearby, they were like, did something happen in this house, the one that they were working on? I was like, I don't think so. Because they kind of give them like the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
And so we eventually got a hold of them, and then are the owners, and they had bought it. They'd owned it for like 20 years at that point. Um, and turns out they wanted to sell. And then I believe it was them that kind of filled us in on what was going on. And it is the site, you can actually you can Google a lot of this stuff if you're interested in hearing more about this. But it is the longest unsolved active murder case in San Bernardino County.
Lovely.
Yeah,
That would
so
make a great headline. Come rent our place.
yeah, well, I'll tell we'll go to it later, but like every once in a while, I'll save that part. So we found that out, and more detail kind of thing. So this, family moved up there in the 60s. And then they hadn't been up there that long, if I recall. There's a whole documentary on this thing too, like on YouTube, but
Oh,
they hadn't been
for
there that
real? Like
long.
someone actually like did a like one of the true crime documentaries.
Yeah, like the ghost hunter people like came
Oh
in,
wow.
and did early 2000s, I think it was,
Okay.
and did like a whole. So it's unsolved. I mean, there's obviously rumors about who did it, but
Sure.
it's so this family moved up there, mom, dad, two kids, um, moved up, and not too long later, and this is back in the 60s, so there wasn't as much going on. Crestline's a
Sure.
pretty active town nowadays,
Yeah, but
but
it's like a like go hiking, get outdoors type
mhm.
of, you know,
Yep, small community,
small
tight
community.
roads, mountain community.
Yeah.
Up until probably the last 10-20 years or so, it really was just a vacation spot. It wasn't really like a whole lot of people living there full time, so it was very sparsely populated. And there was a snowstorm basically, and uh, this family, they were all brutally murdered, including their dog. And
So
that was
parents, kids,
the
and the dog.
parents, the two kids, and the dog. And they they had leads. There was discussion. There's rumors and stuff, whether it was the brother, a disgruntled ex, um,
So
that
like
kind of stuff.
personal, like someone within the like that knew them.
Yep, some kind of personal. For a while, there was I read something about, I guess, the dad or the brother or somebody worked in like aerospace, like high level, top clearance government kind of stuff. So there was some rumors going around for a little while that the government off them or something like that because they knew something they shouldn't have.
Well,
And
when stuff's
so
unsolved, like everyone has like, well, what do you think happened? Like everyone has their theory about it. I mean, but that's incredibly sad. But so like,
yeah,
you're
most people, sorry, go ahead.
well, but like, so how did the sellers, you know, so you said like you were inclined to ask about it because your workers were getting the heebie-jeebies and stuff like that, but like, how did the sellers just drop this? Like, oh, this happened. Um, like that's just a wild thing to disclose, I guess you would say. And
Yeah,
in
for sure,
California,
for
do you
sure.
have
And
to?
I honestly, I don't, this is probably now going back 3 or 4 years since we bought it. And at the time, I worked with my mom and my stepdad, or at least I did back then. And I was more the project manager on the flips, and my dad handled some of the more of the acquisition stuff. So
Mhm.
he talked more directly to the sellers. And if I remember correctly, we kind of had figured out what had happened, or somebody had told us.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's one of those, you live here long enough, you're going to hear about it. They call them the
Sure.
Bowles murders. The family was named the Bowles,
Okay.
Boles.
Okay.
And I mean, you Google that and you can read all about it. Like I said, there's a documentary. So by the time by the time they had called us, which I think was like probably a year or so after we had finished working on the other house, we already kind of knew about it. So,
Yeah.
but I remember my stepdad telling me the story when he was in there, kind of working with them and signing the paperwork, that he felt something, like he didn't know about the dog, and he
Oh,
felt something before this. He felt something like kind of bump against his leg while they were sitting on the couch, and then he's like, "Do you have a dog?" And they were like, "No." And he's like, "But there was a dog that was like part of the thing that said
wow.
kind of creeped him out." There's I never really was creeped out by the house. Okay, so until I found out. So get this. Um, my last name, obviously, my name's Rich Rice.
Right.
Okay, and the Bulls, were is the Bulls murder,
Yeah.
and we owned the house for probably about a year or so, until just randomly I found this out. My mom had she was fixing it up on some of the stuff that she wanted to do, because for a little while she kept it like as like a family vacation cottage kind of thing.
Where you
Uh,
guys would go stay,
they would,
or
yeah, they would
like
come,
or they would go stay, or
yeah,
friends.
friends and family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I live up here full time, so
Sure. Sure.
um, but friends and family were using it, so they were. So my mom had this handyman over, and we were talking about it. It was one of the guys that worked for me quite a bit. His name was Floyd, and his first name was Floyd. And again, my last name's Rice. Well, the number one suspect in all of this, that by all accounts, pretty much people that have researched it and done all this over the years,
It's who they
uh,
think did it, but
they
they
think
just
it
don't
was
have
the
the proof.
brother, the wife's brother, the wife's brother, for whatever reason. And his name, and again, I didn't know this for probably about a year until we owned the house. His name was Floyd Rice. His last name was
The
Rice.
irony.
And I
Yeah.
was talking to my guy Floyd in there, and when they told me, yeah, it was Floyd Rice, and and the hairs stood up on the back of my neck, that I was just like, oh crap.
Like, am I getting punked right now?
Yeah, I know. I was like, no way. No
Like
way.
that. There's no way that's true. Like that's wild, man. And then, like, now tell me this: do you have any idea if your dad got, when he was negotiating the deal, if he got a discount because of that history, like, um, or if it was just like, hey, we're disclosing this, but like it's not impacting the transaction.
I think it was probably more to do with the condition the house was in.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that really played too much into it. Uh, that's a good question. I'll have to ask him.
Well,
Maybe a
no,
follow up. But
like, so, like, okay, so the reason why I bring that up is because, like, I one time had an agent call me. She's like, Courtney, so I've had two scenarios like this that had recent. Now, this obviously you bought it decades later, so right, so it's more so it just has the history,
mhm.
and I could see like murders going a few different ways. So number one, you just have the history, and so do you know in California if you have to disclose if
You
someone's
do.
died in the house
I think it's 3 years. I
within
don't
the
remember.
last 3 years?
I think it's only 3 years. Yeah, but
Yeah, so you're in
something
the
like
clear with
that. I
this.
mean, they're not under any legal obligation, but yeah, they were. He might have. We did get a smoking deal on it.
Right.
We ended up
Well,
getting an owner carry on it, and
some creative deal, some
yep,
creative deal making with it. I
yep,
mean
put a
that,
little bit
that
down and carried for I think 10 years or something like that. So it was a
that's
very
awesome.
small payment. It was a great deal. So
Well, and I guess my point is like people get a stigma about this stuff.
mhm.
In like one of two ways. They either like, ooh, I love this stuff, and they're like it can kind of bring like now I know Kurt Cobain is like famous, but like you get some houses that have like a history and people want to stay there. So like you can make
Yeah,
it Airbnb and people like want to be there.
yep.
Or
And we
like
talked about doing that for a long time, because there were people. I mean, we uh there's like a historical society up here that runs it, or the little historical society in the Lee, that they do like a, you know, kind of around this time of the year, they do like a murder history kind of thing, and it always comes up. There's interesting things about the house too. That's like there's still a bullet hole
Oh wow.
in one of the cabinets that kind of goes through. And then there was in one room we have like LVT tile on, or actually we did like sheet linoleum, sheet vinyl on all of it. But in the one room, because they basically corralled the family in the back room, and that's where it
Oh
happened.
wow.
And there's still to this day like a big stain of of blood on the floor, where you can see it's like clear. It's not like
It's not
it's
like
not like a
dirt.
big bright red stain or anything, but you can see the
The
you know
woods
the
is colored.
the yeah, it was like a weird old tile. And
Oh
and
wow.
that one room, my stepdad made me, when we were picking out flooring, he was very specific about that being carpet still, to just in case they ever need to pull DNA or whatever, they
Or
reopen the
anything
case.
like you want something easy to like,
Yeah, they could just pull back the carpet and look
wow.
at it. But yeah, we've
Like
had tons of people that wanted to.
in case they reopen the
Yep,
case.
yep.
That's, I mean, that's smart. Like thinking of if your house is a part of an open, you know,
Yep. Yeah, we all kind of laughed when he said it,
that-
but then you're like, it makes sense.
that's actually smart. Well, and
Yeah.
so it's like the idea of like, well, hold on, is that someone's bedroom? Like, what do y'all do with that room? The
Yeah,
room
it's only a 2-bedroom house,
that
so
someone has to. Oh God.
yeah. I've
I
slept in
think.
it. It's I honestly, the house, like, other than that one thing, the house never really bothered me all that much. I used to hang out there all the time.
Well,
Uh,
and I think again,
you know.
it's like everyone has their different response to it. Either it can
Mhm.
creep you out, it can be like, yeah, it doesn't bother me. But like again, I think there's people who are gonna be drawn to it, drawn
Yeah.
to the stigma, or there's gonna people who are gonna be like, oh, that house has a stigma. Like I've had agents call me with, suicide houses, and then there was
Mhm.
a murder suicide house that's just sitting on the market and they can't sell it because like it was in the news, but that one was like a recent thing, right? So like everyone knows that's the house. Like there was one where a politician killed himself in the garage. And the house, the family, obviously they're like, we want to get out of here,
Mhm.
and it was all over, like everyone knew about it, neighbors knew about it. And so like when the agent put it for sale, a lot of people were like, do you know what happened in the bath, like in the garage? um and it just sat on the market. If I knew what I know now, I would have been like, hell yeah, I'm buying it, either subject to seller financing at a great
Yep.
smoking deal. And it just did not sell. It was in a great neighborhood. And so like literally they had to renovate the garage into like a game room to like attract someone.
Yeah.
Like basically giving an amenity that would, woo someone in,
Mhm.
and kind of overwhelm the stigma. And
Yeah.
so that's wild, man. And
Well,
so
you're
there's
right, and like, because I mean, we talked about doing an Airbnb, like a murder themed, Airbnb, because we had people that were, guys that had, when we were it was getting worked on, there was, people coming and going, and some of the guys were really into it and like wanted to, had friends, but we if I was wanting to go down the Airbnb route again, I would definitely do that. And
I
then
could see that you could have like, here's the documentary, like and
yeah,
have like a photo album of like all the like news clippings and like
yeah.
online articles and like, or I don't
I
know,
wanted to do some kind of like automated, like thumping on
whatever.
the floor or something, like,
Oh my goodness. You know,
you know.
like, and I feel like there's people who would respond to that. And like with the age of social media, you could totally market it and people would like travel for as like a destination, like which is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah,
But
no,
like
I think it would absolutely work, honestly. Like, I have no interest in doing that route again, but I
I
really
don't
think it
blame
would.
you.
So if
Um,
anybody's wanting to master lease a
yeah,
murder
and then
mystery
they do it,
Airbnb,
right?
hit me up.
Like, yeah, you'll
My tenant
sublease
just moved
it.
out. So
So you'll sublease to the person who will do that. So
yeah.
well, man,
But there
that's
are people, on your other note, sorry, there are
yeah.
people that don't, it definitely takes a hit. Like, I had somebody
Yeah.
that was interested in another house, didn't work out, and I showed him that ahead of time, like gave him a heads up, and the boyfriend had lived up here and he recognized the house,
Yeah.
and she was like, absolutely, she's like, hey, it's a cute house, great house, but no, I'm too freaked out by that, I can't do it,
So
so
again, you're going to have these different reactions, and like whether you legally have to disclose it or not, stigma. It's like
mhm.
it can be so even growing up in a small town, my parents are from a town of 900 people.
Wow.
Yes. And my dad's one of 10, my mom's one of 5. So I'm related to like everyone in that town.
Yep. Yep.
But like I remember growing up and it's like Katrina took it out, but there was this house that was like known as haunted. Everyone in town knew about it.
Mhm.
And so it's like there's like a on one side we were like, hey, you can capitalize on it, make it an Airbnb, highlight it, and you would have to like attract people who would want that. But then on the other side, you've got like you might struggle to sell it or rent it because if
Mhm.
people knew, right? Like some people they can't overcome it. And so um that's just the wild part. And so what are some lessons you've learned from this deal just in general that you take into like other like if you were to come across another deal that had history like this? Not
Um,
exactly like it, but you know what I mean.
yeah, I definitely, I mean, like I said, I didn't originally negotiate the purchase, but I think if it was going to be doing it again, I would definitely kind of lean into that, um, that more like, well, it's probably more of a detriment, even though, yeah, legally you don't have to disclose it. Like, I still feel like I need to tell people, like, when I rent it out, like the last tenant that I had in there, um, she never asked, but I figured at some point she was gonna talk to the neighbors. The neighbors
Right,
the neighbors know what it is. They don't have a
right,
problem living next door to it.
right. Maybe they
So,
do and they just can't move. But yeah.
but
Yeah.
as I think, as far like a lesson learned would just be, you know, yeah, I guess probably just lean into it a little bit more on that seller finance side and be like, yeah, I
Well,
because it does hurt, like it does
yeah.
rent slower, people in the town know. I definitely don't have any locals interested in it.
They're like,
It's the
yeah,
people
no.
that are like coming from out of town,
Yeah.
and
Well,
you know,
and that's the thing with anything having a stigma, right? And it can have a stigma for any reason. It's like, I'm gonna have a hard time selling or renting this.
mhm,
And basically, I either need such a discount that I can handle longer vacancy, or I need great financing, hence the
yeah,
seller financing, stuff like that, like you guys got, where, hey, I can, basically there's some shared responsibility. Um,
mhm,
if the seller's like, no, I don't want to discount it that much, I'm like, okay, well, great. Well, then I'm gonna look for some, I might be able to give you a price, but you've got to give me that, maybe less than market rate terms.
mhm.
The market's at 6%, maybe give me a 3% interest rate or something,
Yeah,
something.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. I
So
mean, we
where I
got
can
it
make up for it.
for. I mean, we're talking a house in California. That's. I mean, we got it. I think we picked it up for 70,000. We put 20 down with like a $400 a month seller carry,
Wow.
for 10
How,
years.
what's the rehab? How much did it, you said it
I
was
think the
a lot.
rehab ended up costing us like 25. We didn't do a whole lot to it. We normally we would, our kind of our MO up here in the mountains is we'll redo it to make it, we'll keep a little bit of the mountain flair, like maybe we'll keep the
Yeah.
the wood ceilings or something, but we paint everything else out and put new fixtures, do like redo it so that's nice and modern and fresh. This one we just kind
So
of left a little bit more. We wanted to kind of maintain the character of it a little bit more. Um,
a
you
lot of
know,
the characters, I like, but okay, like 100,000, you're into it roughly 100, the closing costs and stuff like that. What do you think it's worth as it sits?
Probably close to 3.
I mean, that's wild. I mean, first of all, killer deal, like you said. No, all the pun intended, I guess. Respectfully, but like at the end of the day,
Took me
uh,
a second, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a level. I mean, like that's a. I guess the question
I would
is,
do 5 more. Honestly, I don't care what happened
yeah.
there. If
Well,
there's
and I
5
guess
more
that's
like
a
that,
question for everyone, on YouTube, guys. Comment, if you guys are watching on YouTube, comment below, would you buy a house that had not only that level of a murder, husband, wife, the 2 kids and the dog. I mean, that's just gut-wrenching, but it's an open case. And so, I mean, brilliant with like the idea with the carpet in case they have to come back, right? You never know, they
Mhm.
might get a break in the case and come back. So, if you guys put in the comments below, what are your thoughts? Would you buy one like this? Would you not? And so Rich, you're saying you would buy 5 more like this.
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
Yep.
obviously those numbers, you know, and I think that's where it comes down to. A lot of times people say, oh, I would never buy a house, like XYZ, but I'm like, if the price was right, you might be like, take that back. I might be interested, like,
Yeah, exactly.
um,
Exactly. I mean, like I said, it's worth 3 and it rents for 2. Rents for
that's
$2,000 a month.
and you have a 400 a month to the seller plus what? A
Pretty much
property
all in
tax
with insurance, because insurance is a little high up here. Like our all in
So,
is like pretty much 1,000. It's like 995.
and so you're cash flowing close to 1,000.
Yeah.
That's yeah, fantastic. I went to Crestline once in my life, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a great little area. I loved it. So, man, that's awesome. So, thanks so much for sharing your story with me
No
today.
problem.
And man, I appreciate that. And now you got me thinking. I might even go watch that documentary. I don't know if I have it in me. I might.
Check it out. Yeah.
You watched it? You went and watched it
I did. We actually watched it in the house. That was like the first thing we did. We popped
in
the
the
DVD
house.
player in and
That's
we
a
watched it
whole
in the
nother
house.
freaking level, dude.
Yeah,
You watch.
it was pretty rad.
I mean, imagine like
We're like looking over the
no, it's like imagine what like listening to like a true crime podcast with the family. Like
Mhm.
of like what but like so doing oh man, watching it in that's freaking wild. That's a whole nother level. Kudos to you for that. I don't know if I would have had I would have had the balls for that one, but well man, look, I'm gonna find the documentary. I'm gonna put it in the show notes because now I think we're all intrigued. But man, this was a fun story. Thanks. Fun, sad, all the above, like
Yeah.
wild story. Appreciate you sharing it with me, man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Y'all, these stories with my friends have been wild, and I know there's a lot more of these types of stories out there. And so, for those of you listening, I'd love to hear yours. Go on over to YouTube where this video is, or if you're watching now on YouTube, I'd love to hear your story in the comments because, again, whether you're a real estate agent, you flip, you have rentals, things like that. Look, eventually, I think, especially if you're doing this over a period of time, especially if you're buying a number of properties, you're eventually going to come across something like this. So I'm going to end this episode with my spooky story. Some of you have heard it before, so bear with me if you had. But when I think about my stories in real estate, this is easily one of my top 3 stories. So this was actually last year, so 2023. I had a few agents reach out to me. They're like, we don't even think you might want this house, Courtney. And they're like, I don't even know if you'll want it, but I've got this house that has some complications. And look, if it's complicated, I'm intrigued. And so I literally said, hey, I'm even more interested in it. So what ended up happening was there was the agents kept using the words religious relic, and it like had like a stigma, like, and I was like, okay, like, guys, what's actually going on? And so what I find out was that this house, so the agent had it listed for the heir, and I'll tell you more about the heir later because that makes this story like takes it to a whole nother level. That this heir, the property belonged to a former voodoo priest. I am from New Orleans. Y'all, I promise you, I do not go around buying houses from voodoo priests ever until last year. Bound to have happened over the last 10 years, but so I finally came across this. And so this guy was a former voodoo priest, and he unfortunately died in the house. And I'll tell you about that here in a second. But all of his stuff was left, and that's where the religious relic part comes into play. The house also had a level where, like, this comes into your normal, in Louisiana we call it succession, but like probate houses, where when people die, they leave their stuff, but also, this guy was unfortunately, he had health issues toward the end of his life. And so there's ramifications from that, deferred maintenance. And unfortunately, toward the end of his life, he could not let his pets out, his dog and his bird. And so there was literally, dog shit like everywhere in the house because the dog was being let outside, so it was just going to the bathroom in the house. Long story short, though, between that, the knowledge that he died in the house, the condition of it, all that, the agent didn't think anyone would want it. To top it all off, it's not just a house. It was actually a mobile home. One side opened up and then a house addition, like a stick-built house addition happened to it. So it would never get true financing. So it was a quirky house. It had a very interesting story, and then the stuff inside the house. So let's talk about the religious relic. When I walked this house, someone walked it for me before I walked it, and they were like, we had the heebie-jeebies. We were just like, oh, I'm like, all right, I know what I'm walking into. So I have boots in the back of my car that I put on when I go walk. You understand the type of house I'm talking about. And so I put those boots on and I'm walking through, there's a layer of dog crap throughout the whole house. And I'm walking through the house, and in one section he had a huge book collection, but it was kind of like behind a curtain, and there was all this stuff. And these were books that were in English, I think Roman, Latin, Greek. Like, it was very interesting, a lot of religious books. Apparently, later in life, he had explored other religions. So there was everything from, really big stuff on Catholicism, Buddhism, like other different things. So you have that, but then you had a lot of other religious relics throughout the house, a lot of things with Catholicism. But then when you go into the bathroom, this place only had one bathroom. When you go into the bathroom, there was literally medical photos of a skull on the mirror. Do not know, never had the chance to ask the guy why he had that, right? I remember walking out of the bathroom, and when I have houses like that that are really like the odor is so strong, I usually have like an essential oil type of thing, and I roll it and I put it on the inside of my nose. There's other things like, I don't know, Vaseline or whatever, the stuff you can put in your nose, just so strong that it can, it fills your nose. And so I had done that, and so I could actually walk through it without throwing up. But when I walk out of the bathroom, and all of a sudden I heard, and I'm like, this isn't I looked down, which I trying to not look down a lot, right? I looked down and there was rat carcasses. Ugh. If I can find the picture, I'll put it in here. So, of that. And then, because I'm sure you guys would want to see this. And so if you're listening to this episode, you're going to miss out because there's a few different places where we're going to try to put photos in. You definitely want to check it out on YouTube and actually watch this one. But so I'm walking through the house, seeing different things. The story was the guy later in his life was having health issues, and there was a bad storm, the power went out, and he was inside on a electric-based oxygen. And when the power went out, unfortunately, he was found crawling to the door where his portable oxygen was on the patio. Super sad, like again, super sad story. And that's, how, he had been found, where he had died in the house. So moving forward, when he died, he chose to not leave it to any remaining family. Instead, he left it to a close friend, which happened to be a Catholic priest. And this Catholic priest I've never personally met. I've spoken with him. I ended up getting this deal on seller financing, and so I make him payments every month. So that's a whole nother story relating to the deal. But the agent was so surprised that I wanted it because of the stigma, the condition, the whole half trailer, half house thing. And so I ended up buying it, right? Got a stellar deal on it. And I was so worried my cleanout crew would quit on me because of the situation. And like literally they had like, taxidermied boar things, and so they're cleaning it out, and they're like, we found his diary. And I literally, when they contacted me, I said, shut the front door. I do not want to see that thing. I do not want to hear that thing. I don't want to even know. I don't want that in my brain. I just refused. Now some of you probably were curious enough. We're like, yes, I'd like to know what was in the diary. Yeah, no. They found stuff like that. Thankfully, the crew did not quit on me. They definitely were going through. They heard of the story. I think a neighbor came over, and also, if I remember right. But you know, I was afraid that that would cause them to want to quit, right? Thankfully, we made it through it. Um, and it was funny, we'll buy houses with stuff in it, and if stuff seems valuable, we'll take it out and we'll flip it, right? And we've gotten just about everything in this house. But there was something in the house. They had a lot of religious relic, and so we've been having a hard time like finding people who would buy that, like very niche stuff. But long story short, though, that is my story with buying my voodoo priest house. It's at the end of the day, some of the lessons I learned was there's actually something really valuable in the house. Um, it was like a piece of an armor, like a helmet, think of like a Sparta helmet. And when I picked it up, like when I walked that house and I picked it up, I could not pick it up with a single hand. And so I believe it was silver, pure silver. My lesson learned is I should have immediately stopped, picked up the phone and said, hey, I want to buy this. I want this. Let me modify the purchase agreement to include that this stays. Because the Catholic priest had basically allowed some friends in the area to come and get, like, I think there's a dishwasher, no, like a washer and dryer they let someone get, and then like some of the Catholic memorabilia they had allowed some people to take. And when I bought it, that Sparta helmet was no longer there. If we can include the photo, I want to include it in here. That is ultimately one of the biggest lessons I learned on that. And that if you see something, especially when it's like a probate situation, when you're getting the stuff with the house, and yeah, lessons learned. So that's my wild and crazy voodoo priest house. But I was able to get a great deal on it. I was able to get seller financing with it because it was such a unique situation. Literally, the real estate agents did not believe I would want it, but when it is an unsellable house for whatever reason, suicide, murder, they die from natural causes or other things, or just have a ghost, whatever. Like the other stories we talked throughout this episode, when something is unsellable, then the question just becomes, is there a price where you can tear it down and rebuild? Right? Is there a price where they can seller finance it and like basically offset that? And then you just have to build in like, hey, will it be harder to sell? Do you in your state, you have to disclose things, right? You need to know that. What do you legally have to do? If there is body fluid stuff, that was something when we pulled the carpet where he died, we had to look and see, because if not, I was going to have to hire like a company that specializes in cleaning up like body fluids, whether it's blood, whatever, right? Thankfully we didn't have there wasn't anything in the subfloor. So those are things that you should keep in mind. There's a level with disclosure of legally what you have to do. There's also a level of what you feel like you morally and ethically have to do. And ultimately when it comes to that, you just need to build into your numbers that this, of like neighbor interference, right? This might be harder to sell or rent, or especially if it was in the news or anything like that. So, keep those things in mind. There's physical things you have to do, like I said, with the cleanup, things like that. But there's also things with the stigma. And actually, before I finish this story, the Catholic priest who was now the owner of it, he had inherited it. I said, hey, Father, I've never done this before, but do you mind I said, I grew up Catholic, but I'm not practicing. I don't really know how to ask you this, but can you do something to help cleanse the house for me? And when he came in town, before I bought it, he said, yes, ma'am, I will do that for you. And he texted me verifying that it had been done. Because I walked that house twice alone, and it was like, even I got the heebie-jeebies. It was just like, I don't know, the house was unique. And so don't be afraid to doing those things. Am I Catholic? No. But there's a level there that some people will use, do a sage, they'll do different things. I had it built into this deal, so like it didn't cost me anything. It was just a favor I could ask. So with that being said, that is today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed these spooky stories. Look, with Halloween coming up, I figured that I'd talk about some of these things because, they come up. It's a part of life, and real estate a lot of times is tied to it, or from time to time can be tied to it. So that's today's stories. I'd love to hear yours in the comments. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you enjoyed this, or if you feel like someone would love to hear one of these stories, make sure you share this episode with them. And as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in to the Strategic Success Podcast.